University, and this presentation today is going to be on exercise and mental health and all the different things that go into the relationship between the two and how we can do a better job serving our students and our staff with this topic. Thank you guys for coming today. I think this is a very undervalued topic at times, but it's getting better with people recognizing it, and hopefully this presentation today will help you guys. The goal of this presentation is that you'll leave with a better knowledge of mental health and its relation to our roles in campus recreation and be better equipped to help our students after you leave here today. This is obviously a very broad and a very complex topic, so there's no way for me to go over everything that I could go over in 1 hour. This presentation is actually based off a series of articles that I wrote on this subject, and I was already condensing things down for the articles, and I was further condensing it down for the presentation. So I tried to cliff note things as much as I could. A lot of the further detailed research studies and citations and things like that I have, if anyone's interested. So I'll have an opportunity for questions at the end, but also if you'd like more resources on this topic, you can let me know. Real quick, who in here is professional staff? Who in here is GAs? And who in here is like specifically working in fitness is your area? Okay, so it's a pretty good mix of everybody. There's something in here for everybody. I think a lot of this entire presentation will apply to you no matter what area of rec you work in. And then towards the end, we'll be getting into a little more specific things for exercise program design, so everybody will have something to take from it. Basically, what we're going to go over real quick is what is mental health, why is it important, what is our role in depending on what our job position is, what's the relationship between mental health and exercise, and then a big chunk of it is going to be how does the stress response system work, which is what really wraps all of this together, and then how do we design better exercise programs with the above in mind. So it's a lot of stuff, but I tried to condense it down to some pretty kind of cliff note information that we can get through that as we go through should set up your understanding for what we go through at the end. A little bit about me. I'm the Assistant Director of Fitness at Ohio University. I'm in charge of personal training, group fitness, special events, different programs that we do there. We're doing a lot more with wellness now, and that has a lot to do with what this presentation goes over. I have a pretty broad background of a lot of different things. I've worked in healthcare and strength and conditioning coaching, different things like that. This topic means a lot to me, not only because, as I'm sure you all know, working in campus rec, that we see mental health as an issue that we deal with on a regular basis with students, but also is something that I struggled with for a really long time. And because when I was going through growing up in undergrad, didn't have really an understanding of anything about mental health. You know, I grew up in my family, didn't really have an understanding of what psychiatry even was. You know, words like anxiety and depression just either made you like roll your eyes or cringe. And so the lack of understanding that I had definitely made my issues with all of these things a lot more difficult, which is why all this means a lot to me now is just this basic information can help people so much as you work to help people work through their own issues. So I have a pretty broad background on a lot of these things. I also compete in powerlifting at a fairly high level, which also has a lot to do with this, which I'll go into more, and understanding how we're going to talk about how different types of exercise and the intensity of the exercise does affect your mental health and your stress response. So we'll go over that a little more too, and I'll share some of my own experiences. So really briefly, for an intro of what is mental health, just these standard kind of textbook definitions to kick us off. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So pretty broad. Mental health is broader than just somebody having a mental illness. So mental health applies to everybody, whether you have a diagnosed mental illness or not. Now, mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. Such conditions affect someone's ability to relate to others and function each day. Each person has different experiences, which is important to note, even people with the same diagnosis. So it's very difficult to box people in depending on what their mental illness is. Also, something to keep in mind with mental illness is while the symptoms may resemble what everybody goes through on a regular basis, just with life being stressful at times, that typically people will say that if it goes on for more than a few weeks at a time, that's when it's good to go see a doctor, go see a counselor, and get that addressed. So typically everybody's mental health is important. If you're struggling with your mental health for a repeated, consistent period of time is when people look at, do you need to look into see if you possibly have mental illness. put some common mental illnesses up here. There's a lot of them that goes beyond this list, but these are probably the ones you're most familiar with seeing. Anxiety, ADHD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders is classified under mental illnesses. A lot of these are intertwined with each other. So I work on the eating disorder support team at OU, and we have a lot of people who have an eating disorder that's also tied to their depression or tied to their anxiety. A lot of people have bipolar disorder that'll be tied to their depression. So it's a very complex, all tied together system, which we'll be talking about here shortly. Same thing with obsessive compulsive disorder is tied to anxiety. There's a lot of different connections between all of these. So first, broadly, we're basically going to start big and work our way smaller. So why is mental health important just in general in a college setting? This is a crucial time in students' lives when they're in undergrad and grad school, but undergrad, the age range specifically. 1 in 4 young adults between the ages of 18 and 24 have a diagnosable mental illness, which is a lot of people. More than 25% of college students have been diagnosed or treated with a mental health condition. Just shows that being in college, it's about the same rate. So you're not less susceptible if you're in college, vice versa. Almost 73% of students living with a mental health condition experienced a mental health crisis on campus, yet almost 35% report their college did not know about their crisis. And we'll talk about some of those reasons why here, but that's another pretty alarming thing, is that so many students have had a crisis but didn't really actually talk to anyone of their staff at the school about it. And we all know that while friends can be a great support system, it's not going to give you what an actual professional would be able to give you. And with that high level or high amount of people that are dealing with mental health concerns, the reason mental health is so important to success post-college and this window that we have with our students is so important is an estimated 26% of homeless adults stay in shelters live with serious mental illness. 20% of state prisoners and 21% of local jail prisoners have mental health issues. Serious mental illness costs, almost $195 billion in lost earnings per year. People die almost 25 years earlier than others if they have a serious mental illness, largely due to treatable medical conditions. And over 1/3 of students with a mental health condition aged 14 to 21 who are served by special education drop out, the highest dropout rate of any disability group. So that's pretty crazy to think about when you think about how we're still, as a country and as higher education, moving to serve disability groups more, that mental illness, which is considered a disability, is the highest dropout rate of any of those groups, which is pretty alarming. So we see that we have all these students, basically 1/4 of our students that are dealing with these issues, and our experience with them during this time in their lives can make or break whether they fall into one of these categories post-college. Why is it important to us in our roles in recreation? Recreation is no longer comprised of only fitness or sports activities. I know that, we all know that we're always trying to fight the stereotype of recreation is just going to the gym and working out, or it's just playing an intramural game. It's far beyond that now. So in our roles and all of our institutions, I'm sure we're all having the same conversation of how do we broaden not only what we do, but people's understanding of what we do. Exercise and recreational activities are deeply interconnected with mental health and well-being, which we'll talk about more. And we play a unique role in the lives of our participants and employees and come in contact with many students who would otherwise not discuss mental health concerns with someone on campus. I'm sure, that we could all already probably think of a situation where we've had a student email us, stop into our office, and share with us stuff that they still haven't went and talked to anyone professionally about it, but they feel comfortable with us because they work with us. So we come in contact with these students a lot, and we have the ability to impact them on what their path is moving forward. The issue of stigma, which a lot of our students deal with, where if nothing else, our role with what we do with students is, very specific. We're not counselors, we're not professionals in the mental health realm. But just removing stigma to these students is a very important part of this issue. This is crazy that almost half of adolescents that in the study that they did in 2010 that had a mental illness describe experiencing stigma from family members with some of these different things here. 62% experienced stigma from peers. which often led to friendship losses and social rejection. And 35% report stigma from teachers and school staff, which is really, discouraging for people who are working in education. So this is the other thing, is when we have students, these are adolescents, so we have these students that are coming into this crucial time in our lives working campus recreation, who are coming from this. So they're already unwilling to deal with a lot of these issues, and we have a really important role in being able to break some of this stigma and show them that this is something they can address and they don't have to feel weird about it, having any of these issues like that. Contributes to why 60% of adults with mental illness did not receive treatment in the past year. There was also other issues in addition to stigma, like cost barriers and lack of knowledge regarding how to get treatment, which are two things we can deal with on campus. All of our institutions have some sort of mental health care or counseling that's offered to students, typically free of charge, and lack of knowledge that's our role, is how to give them the knowledge and how to access those resources. And then specifically when we talk about fitness, and I think this applies a lot to our fitness staff as well, is you have stigma that is even further nailed down when people view mental illness as a sort of weakness, or when people are looking at fitness and everything is trying to be this high standard that they're holding themselves. They see that the mental illness is even harder to deal with in that time. So I interviewed a bunch of different psychiatrists about different populations and how they dealt with mental health, and she was talking about athletes and people who are into working out and fitness and are recreationally involved. And you see that not only does a lot of them struggle with stigma, but a lot of the things that make people very driven and make them good at recreational sports, make them good, some of our best employees can sometimes be people who are dealing with some of this stuff the most, which is tough, because then you're in the point of where you're trying to, it's not like we have an employee that's doing a bad job, but maybe we have to reel them in on some of the things that they're doing, which I know I've been in that situation many times with some of my undergrad students, and I'm sure some of you have as well. So some things to consider. So what is our role? As recreational staff, we have the opportunity to support, educate, and destigmatize, connect to resources, and promote holistic wellness. So if nothing else, you don't have to be an expert on any of this stuff. We can point to resources and put them in the right direction, be supportive and encouraging, and break stigma, promote holistic wellness. Everybody in this room can do that no matter what your role is in recreation, and that'll already take care of many of the issues that I just discussed. As fitness professionals specifically, we have the opportunity to facilitate and promote well-rounded fitness and well-being through comprehensive programs and services, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, and play a crucial role in stress management, mental health improvement, and student self-care. What we do in our job positions in fitness has a huge effect on how people's mental health is and their growth in that area. So, now that we talked about why it's important, this population of students that we're dealing with and some of these numbers, we're going to talk about the relationship between exercise and mental health. And in order to understand that, we'll have to talk about the system that everything feeds into, and then we'll go into some of the specific recommendations. So, your mental health has a direct physiological effect on your body that affects your performance and your ability to exercise. And then conversely, how you exercise has a profound effect on your mental health, even outside of the gym. So people who have a mental illness or are just struggling with mental health in general, their ability to exercise will be affected, their ability to participate in physical activity. And then conversely, people who have a mental illness, exercise will affect their mental health. So it can easily, if things aren't being managed appropriately, turn into a very bad cyclical spiral of just one thing can make the other thing worse, or we can turn around and make one thing make the other thing better. It's very particular to that system. How we typically view things, which is what we're all trying to move away from, is, and still, even for many of us who know that this isn't the case, we still view things kind of in this way. It's like, okay, mental health's in this box, counseling's kind of related to it. If you're taking medicine, that's kind of related to it. But hanging out with your friends is over here. Maybe exercise is over here. Schoolwork's here. Your relationships over here. It's very easy for students to view things this way as well, because everything's separated. Everything's in different boxes. Like, well, maybe I'm having issues with my relationship. I'm overloaded with school. I'm eating like crap. I'm exercising too hard. but I'll go see the counselor about the mental health stuff. They don't view any of these things as connected, and that's one thing that we can work to change for people. How stress response works, which is why all these things are connected, is first we'll define stress and kind of go into how the body responds to it. So stress represents the effects of anything that seriously threatens homeostasis. So homeostasis is basically your body running at perfect capacity. Everything's working well, you're surviving. If homeostasis is at its perfect, everything is balanced in your body, everything's running smoothly. If it's at its worst, then you would die. And anything that is stress can throw the seesaw out of whack that is homeostasis is a good way to kind of look at it. I know one thing that I want you to consider when we move forward describing some of these things is it's easy to think of the term stress. We use it in everyday conversation of, oh, I'm stressed out. We always view it as just like maybe just worrying or something. But stress really is anything that can throw this out of whack, both good and bad. So stress is just external things that are happening to the system. So we want to look at it that way in the context of this presentation that we're going over here. This is important too. The body does not differentiate between stressors. All stress is accumulative over time. This is the strength coach from the Cardinals that I've talked to a lot about different things, and he has also worked with some Olympic sprinters, and one of the some of the Olympic sprint coaches do a lot with stress management as well because of the high stress demands of sprinting. And that's something that they've gotten very big into looking into, and more pro sport teams are looking at this too, is that if a player has a really bad practice, if two players say go through the same practice, it's an intense practice, they both go home and one of them is going home to a very bad home situation and one of them is going to a very relaxing home situation, their training over the course of weeks will be totally different because how stress is affecting that. Sometimes very generalized stress can actually affect you worse than stress of, say, a broken bone. They did some studies where they looked at stress hormone release when somebody had an injury versus when they were going through, say, like a divorce or something that was very chronic stress, and the stress response to those situations was worse than the injury. So that's something to keep in mind, that all stress is stress and accumulates over time. That's how we have to look at it with all these different topics. So it's all connected. So all this stuff, while they're different topics, they all have interconnected responses. What you eat affects your stress response. Your relationships, your schoolwork, you're taking medication, they all have direct and very proven effects on your stress hormones, on all these different parts of your system and how they work. So we have to understand all these things are connected, and if we can help students understand this, it'll be a lot. It seems like it would be more daunting, but I think it's less to realize that, okay, like you sit down and you put together a calendar for your schoolwork, you put together your, you have a daily planner that you write out your schedule with, you have all these things you plan for, you plan your workouts, you plan when you're gonna go hang out with your friends. Why would you not plan this stuff? It's all part of the same thing, it's all affecting each other. So when we talk about what connects all of these stress responses is the autonomic nervous system. So this is basically what maintains that homeostasis of that seesaw is the autonomic nervous system. What it is, and this is again, we could go super in depth on all this, I'm just keeping it very simple, is it connects your brain to all of your internal organs. It's separated into two systems, your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. The easiest way to remember what these two things do is your sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight, your parasympathetic is rest and digest. So when everything is full go, that's your sympathetic. When you're totally relaxed, it's parasympathetic. And a really good book that I recommend to everybody that not only goes into mental health as one of the chapters, but it goes into a lot of different conditions that we deal with, especially with healthcare in our country, is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it talks about this topic of stress response. And the whole reason that it's titled that way is the author talks about how when you look at stress response, that animals in the wild are either doing one of these two things typically. They're relaxing completely, and they're just eating, hanging out, doing whatever, or they're running for their lives. And as humans, we are in this weird situation where we don't, especially in now modern 21st century, we're not in this situation. We're in this middle where we're worrying about bills, we're worrying about your relationships, we're worried about schoolwork getting turned in. So rather than it being like, I need to survive today and I'm running for my life, or I'm completely relaxed, we constantly spend time in this middle ground, which constantly has this stress response running. So this book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, talks about how all these different conditions affect people because of the stress response. And there's a lot of research in the book, and it's an easy read too. It's a very interesting read to read through. But they talk about how all these people that have chronic stress throughout their lives, and it factors into that statistic of people dying 25 years earlier when they have mental illness, that they develop all these different cardiovascular disease, all these different things quicker than everybody else, and stress literally kills them. It's not the thing that kills them. You don't go and they don't tell you the cause of death was stress, but stress leads to all these other conditions, which can then cause you to get very sick and even die. So it's a really good book, and I think the guy does a really good job using analogies to paint the picture of how these systems work. So again, rest and digest versus fight or flight, that's really important for us to understand when we talk about the relationship between exercise and mental health. I like using analogies too when I talk about stuff. I think it makes it easy to understand. When we talk about this system that operates the stress response, I like to think of it like a car. Is that a dog? So I like to think of it like a car. So when you're in parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest, foot's off the gas pedal, just idling fine, everything's just car's just sitting there. When you're in the sympathetic nervous system, you're putting the gas pedal all the way down. And when you think about it that way, is how we're going to kind of paint the picture of how, if we're stuck in that middle zone, how it can start to affect things. So the issue of chronic stress is that being constantly in a sympathetic or fight or flight state is like sitting there in park, constantly pushing down the gas pedal all day, every day. And I don't know about you, but like the thought of what my car makes it sound like doing that is just like already nauseating to think about. So, especially if you have an old car. So if you think about it, if you sat there all day just with your foot on the gas pedal, like that's obviously not going to be good for your car's engine. And that's basically what happens with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system if we're in chronic stress. Our bodies are designed to either be, all right, I need to jump out of the way of a car, foot to the gas pedal. You hear about those moms that their kid's stuck under a car and they manage to pick up the car somehow, and it doesn't make any sense. That's because everything went full gas pedal to the floor. All the positive stress hormones that allow them to be able to do that all fires at once. But the problem is that's designed for those situations, and a lot of us, especially in this country, have it just constantly running on this middle ground of just constantly burning everything out. So the sympathetic nervous system is not a bad thing. We need it. It's great for a lot of exercise, sport activities, for when we need to make a decision quickly. If crisis happens, we have to handle it. It allows us to think more clearly. There's very good things about it. It causes these epinephrine or adrenaline surges. It releases cortisol, which is good in small amounts, but the problem is when it's elevated over a long period of time. So if you have consistent epinephrine surges and elevated cortisol levels, it can cause a variety of health issues, like I talked about before. Diabetes, heart disease, increases in body fat, lower testosterone levels. Elevated stress hormone levels can also increase the risk for mental illness, such as depression, and even affect how our body reacts to additional stress in the future, including exercise, which is really important to know. So if you're constantly having your foot on the gas pedal, that's going to make you more susceptible to other things. You can think of it as the engine in your car is slowly getting damaged the more you have your foot down on the pedal. So what does this have to do with exercise and mental health? So what we'll do is categorize the variables that affect recreational participants and athletes into three categories: life events, mental illness, and exercise, and talk about how these all affect each other. So the reason I went over that stress response is because that, basically, if you think about homeostasis is that seesaw we talked about. The parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system is that car putting the gas pedal all the way down or all the way up. And these three things are going to affect the functioning of that car. So I want to paint that picture. It's kind of jumping around here a lot, but it's important for us to understand that stress response system for those of you that weren't familiar with it before we talk about these things and how they affect each other. Because now you can see how they're all connected. When we're looking at the car's engine is going to be affected by everything, then we see how these things can all affect each other. So the first category of life events is a mix of controllable and non-controllable variables. And I think this is something very important for our students to understand is, I think typically we have students and people in general, I would say students as employees and patrons, but also us, is we tend to think of things as one thing or the other. So we think of like, everything's out of my control, or I can control everything, which is not true. And I think we deal with that sometimes with students, where we'll have students that will come to us, I can't make my shift this week, everything's out of control. Okay, not everything is out of your control. Or you'll have students that you have to tell, we need you to work for us less. You think you have it all under control right now, but you're burning yourself out. We need to have you bring things down a little bit. And it's typically hard for those students to understand that, but we see that with these things. So work, school, relationships, finances, family. So anything externally happening to these students is going to affect their stress response when it relates to mental health and exercise. Perception also affects stress response, and think psychology. So this is why counseling is very important for so many students, is because there's research that shows that how you perceive an event that is happening to you, that if you perceive, two people could, or the same person with the same physiology, could view the same situation happening to them, good or bad, and whether they view it those two different ways is going to affect how their body literally physically responds to it. And we'll talk about how that affects exercise programming shortly, but that's why it's important for, even if students find, say, a medication or a nutritional fix or better family support, and those things help them with their mental issues, I always recommend that at least for a short period of time, people do meet with a counselor, because if you can improve your even perception slightly of the stresses of these things that are happening to you, it will positively affect your stress response. It'll help with those health issues. It'll help with your ability to adapt to other things that are happening to you. And it kind of goes with the old, how you perceive, I don't know what the quote I'm trying to think of is, but basically how you perceive things is how your attitude will make a big difference. For mental illness, when we go back to that car analogy, chronic stress response in the body can cause a predisposition to mental illness. And evidence shows that a gene found in those with depression can affect their ability to respond to additional stress. The causes of different mental illnesses vary between people. Even two of the same people may have, say, bipolar disorder, and the exact causes of the functioning in their brain and their body that's allowing that to happen can be different. That's why it's so difficult for doctors to prescribe medications and things like that. But there's a lot of evidence to show that the genes can affect their ability to deal with that extra cortisol when they're in chronic stress situations. So if you think about basically chronic stress in the body can cause a predisposition to mental illness. So you have your foot down the gas pedal all the time, the engine's getting beat up, and then then they have, in addition, a gene found in those affects their ability to respond to additional stress. So it's as if you are holding the gas pedal down with a faulty engine to begin with, which is even worse. So that's how we think about these students that have all that life circumstances on their plate. They have chronic stress, and then in addition, their engine isn't working properly to begin with to be able to handle that chronic stress. So mental illness has a profound effect on the body's release of those stress hormones we talked about. A meta-analysis looking at a bunch of different research concluded over 73% of clinically depressed individuals have elevated cortisol levels compared to those without depression. Again, cortisol is not a bad thing in short periods of time, but if it's elevated on a regular basis, it's a bad thing. The fact that almost 3/4 of these depressed individuals had those elevated levels, which we know has an effect on all those health conditions, on exercise, is really, really significant. So we see that what we just talked about, the release of stress hormones contributes to mental illness, and mental illness affects the release of stress hormones. And it's this circle that just can keep going and going and going. So if people are chronically stressed and they have a mental health condition, it's really easy for it to turn into a downward spiral if they don't find ways to accommodate some of these stress responses in the middle. But the good thing is because while just going to the doctor or just a counselor, which those things can help a ton, if they feel like that's their only option and they're not doing those two things, then this is just going to go and go and go and get worse. And then lastly, exercise. Exercise is a double-edged sword when it comes to mental health and stress response. Exercise in general is shown to relieve conditions such as depression through improved mood, self-image, and cognitive function. Something to note too, I know a lot of these research studies I'm showing have to do with depression, and that's because there's not a ton of research that talks about these stress responses and how they relate to exercise and these mental health conditions, which is something that I'm trying to work more with people on possibly doing more and things like that. But a lot of it that we do have has to do with depression, especially since it's one of the more common mental illnesses. But some of these other mental illnesses can affect the stress response even more than things like depression. So it's a double-edged sword. It can be generally very good to improve mood, self-image, and cognitive function. It can both reduce stress response, think of letting the foot off the gas pedal, and increase it, putting the gas pedal to the floor again. What of those two things it's going to be is typically going to relate to the type of exercise. Some examples: cardiovascular versus resistance training and intensity. So percentage of max heart rate or 1 rep max if it's a strength movement. Some studies to kind of give you an idea of some of the stuff that supports this. There's some studies showing that consistent 5 days a week for 8 weeks, cardiovascular exercise kept at less than 50% of max heart rate. So we're talking like walking, swimming, low intensity stuff. Not only improved depressive symptoms, but showed a decrease in blood cortisol and epinephrine levels. And I think that this is one of the things that I struggled with for a long time, of being in such a type A personality. I think so many students feel like there's like mental health doesn't have any sort of this like science behind it of that you could see changes based off things. And people feel like, oh, well, I'm just going to go to the counselor. They're going to be like, do you feel better? And they're like, I don't know. And then they're like, okay. And then it's going to be it. And I know for me, it's like I'm just very strategic, very analytical. It's like I want to know why I'm doing something. I want to know the reasons for it. And when I started gathering this information this year for some of this research I've been doing in these articles and things like that, I was really blown away of like, man, if I would have just known that there really was a lot more meat behind all this stuff, then I think I would have been a lot more eager to handle a lot of these things like before. Because there's plenty of other things that people say if you know your car's broken, you know exactly what's wrong with it, you'll just go get it fixed. But people think mental health is kind of this ambiguous thing. And I think that's also the reason that why, if we connect with our students very much on a personality level, we can have a very positive effect on this. Because I know for me, a lot of the counselors you can meet with are very much the other side of the personality kind of spectrum from a lot of what our fitness professionals or recreational students are. They're very not type A personalities. So they're used to talking to students who really don't care about this stuff. But maybe we have some students who are very analytical. They want to know, like, why is this going to help me? Why is writing something down at night going to help me? I just don't want to do it because it's going to feel okay. But these are some things that this low intensity exercise can make a big difference with removing, decreasing those stress response hormones. And then high intensity exercise to the point of exhibiting overtraining syndrome can cause adrenal insufficiency, which in turn affects the release of stress hormones. So if people are overtraining, then it can conversely affect them in a negative way and can, again, hurt that ability, damage the engine and the ability for it to do its job. So not one of these is perfect. Usually a combination, like we know as fitness professionals, is the best way to go. But you have to keep in mind that exercising to the point of overtraining can be very bad for these people who are dealing with some of these stress response issues. And stress response is also dictated by the psychological perception of exercise. So, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the exercise program design considerations, but this is why if people hate what they're doing, it's going to make things worse. Because now we understand not everyone is going to always enjoy 24/7 the exercise that we have them doing. But if they in general chronically are hating their exercise program, it doesn't matter how perfect that program is designed, it's going to affect their stress response. Their perception of it is going to affect their ability to recover. If you have somebody who does two people that do the exact same difficult workout on, say, a Saturday, if one person absolutely hates it and it just like they were nervous the week leading up to it, they were anxious during it, they felt discouraged after it, it's going to take that person longer to recover from that high intensity workout than the person who just went in happy, was glad they were there to do it, and then left and like, oh, cool, that was fun. So that's something to keep in mind. So to recap all this stress response stuff, stress is anything that throws a seesaw out of whack. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, think of that gas pedal for the engine of your car. Stress hormones tell the body it's go time, so it can be a good thing in certain situations. Too much is not a good thing. Constantly putting your foot on the gas pedal is how life events affect stress hormones, so we're breaking down that engine if you're in that chronic stress state. Mental illness makes it harder to deal with other stressors, so it's like that engine is already faulty to begin with or not functioning correctly. And then exercise affects them both positively and negatively, and there is a point of diminishing returns, which means you can't exercise to the point of where, some exercise will help mental health. Doesn't mean more is always better. I think something that I see all the time, and I think the more that I've learned about this, I think people say it and they mean well when they say it, but they'll just go with the whole like, well, exercise is my therapy, the gym is my therapy, whatever, things like that. And it's just kind of like, I think there are quotes to kind of say that it's a stress relief for them, but I think sometimes people hear that and say that enough to where they think, well, if I just go in the gym and blow off steam, that's enough for my mental health. And it actually can be a point where it can be hurting their mental health. So I think, I've talked to, I work with a lot of powerlifters since I compete in powerlifting, and I put out a survey to a bunch of the people that I work with, asking some really general questions about if they've been diagnosed with a mental health condition, how it affects their training, and vice versa. And I had over 100 people reply to it, and a lot of the answers that were the short answer questions where I left it very open-ended was very like, they would describe how awful everything was, and it was very, very discouraging things to hear some of the people say, and then they would turn around and be like, but I don't need to go see a doctor or a counselor or anything, like, or I don't need medicine or anything, like, I just go in the gym and blow off steam. It's like, well, A, you just described that it's not working, and then B, it's, if you realize that the stress response system works, you realize that that's not a viable way to handle it. And that's something people need to look at, is like there's a point of diminishing returns with that. So to wrap up all of this, kind of what we talked about, of why this is all important, how it can affect everybody as recreational staff in general, and then how that stress response system works. We'll talk about how we design better exercise programs with all these things in mind. The best thing that we can do when we're designing exercise programs is going to be understand the context of exercise in the big picture. Don't think about just segmenting exercise as its own thing. All these things are not separated in different boxes. And implement specific exercise program design considerations to improve and balance stress response, which I'm going to give 5 of them that I think in most cases with students are going to help with the design of their exercise program. So again, to kind of drive home when we're, as a fitness professional, sitting down and you're writing a program for somebody, or we're teaching our personal training staff how to create programs for people, this is how people we tend to think of it. The exercise program will lead to their performance, their nutrition will lead to their body composition. If they go to counseling, that will help their mental health. If they have a good social life, they'll have positive relationships. And it's all like cause, effect, totally separate. And the best thing that we can do is when we're creating these programs, realize that this is not how it works. This cause and effect that's very segmented is not the way that it works. How it works in the context of what we just talked about is more like this, of where we have the nervous system stress response, which is that car engine, and homeostasis of that seesaw. We have all these stressors that we talked about, and there's a lot more. I actually have some of the research I've been doing, I have a chart that's basically an expanded version of this, if I try to kind of bring it down a little bit. But we have these different stressors here, and they affect how this is functioning. And then we have these interventions where we have a good role that we play in of an exercise program for a fitness professional. We also can point people to medical care. We have nutrition, counseling, stress management. We have recovery strategies, which I'll talk about here briefly. But all these things that we do, this stuff may be out of our control as the fitness professionals. But as the fitness professionals and recreation professionals, we have a big role in here where if you think of this as being kind of like filled up or drained all the way down, If this stuff over here drains it down, we have the chance to use this to bring it back up a little bit. And then the end outcomes of this are going to be their exercise outcomes, which are why most people are working out, to improve their body composition, improve their health, reach a goal, whatever they're doing, their mental health, and their general well-being and their quality of life, which is what we talked about, Tim talked about in the beginning of the session today, was how important all this wellness stuff is. And a case for holistic wellness is what I would say that all this brings into effect. So we talked about how important all this well-being, wellness, all this holistic stuff is, and this is why, is that all this stuff is connected all in the middle right here. And it's not just a theory, it's how the body works. And it's about us just tying it all together in a good picture that makes sense. So for the specific design considerations, I would have clients, before you get into the specific adjustments to the program, one of the best things you can do is have clients inventory their stressors. Ideally, the quicker you can get a student who has a mental health concern, or it's just a mental health, you want it to improve, or they're stressed, or whatever it is, the quicker you can get them to see somebody who's a professional to talk to them, the better. Again, we're not counselors. But sometimes to help clients realize, or students or whoever we have realize how really overloaded they can be, is to have them inventory their stressors, to give them categories. Because a lot of them think of stress maybe only in one or two categories, and if we give them a list of those categories and say, write down what you think is a big deal in your life right now under all these categories, that sheet will probably fill up pretty quickly. And that can be a reason for them to say, oh man, maybe I do need to take some off my plate, maybe I need to go see somebody and talk about it, things like that. Track variables outside of sets and reps. So this is why I think sometimes, we're always in a battle of trying to teach our exercise and fitness staff on how to design programs to customize to people. But this is why sometimes just taking a program and just doing an exercise program and assuming it's going to work the same way it worked for you like it worked for somebody else doesn't work. It's because you need to track variables outside of sets and reps. I do a lot of long distance coaching for clients that are in other states. And when I do that, I obviously don't get a chance to see them. But I have them fill out weekly check-ins where I have them tell me how much sleep they got on average every night. I have them rank their how hard they thought the training was over the course of the week, rank their stress levels over the course of the week. And those things just give you a little bit of a picture of and I have it in a spreadsheet where it'll automatically code to different, if they're consistently over this certain level, they'll have red, green, or yellow, depending on what they rated. And if it's if they have 3 weeks in a row where everything's red, it's okay, we may need to adjust some things. You're obviously not recovering. You're obviously, things are tough. What's going on? And sometimes I'll put in the end there, just do you have any other comments you'd like to leave about training? And sometimes just asking that question will be my wife had a kid this week. Okay, well maybe that's going to affect your exercise a little bit. So sometimes understanding that we have to look at things outside of just the sets and reps when people are training. Connect clients and participants to other resources. Exercise is not a replacement for other mental health care. Like I said, exercise is a great tool, but it's not therapy. It's not the answer to everything. So these 5 tips that I know a lot of this is a lot of what to take from this presentation is very broad principles that I think will help everybody, but I wanted to give 5 things that I think you can immediately implement that will help with an exercise program. And these are things that I've written about in more detail in some articles, but I think these are things that have helped me personally. They help the people that I work with. I'm trying to teach my staff on how to do these things more. These are 5 exercise program design tips. Make sure they believe in the program, train optimally, not maximally, set attainable personal records, don't neglect cardiovascular health, and recover as hard as you exercise. So when we talk about make sure they believe in the program, like I said before, psychological state has a profound effect on the stress response in the body. The same goes for an exercise program. If you hate every second of a workout, your negative response to training will be even worse. That's why sometimes, I think especially as exercise professionals, when you start learning about stuff, you're super dogmatic and zealous about, no, this sucks, this is good, do this is stupid. And the more time that goes on for me, it's I have preferences of what I'd like people to do, but I gave a presentation to some club sports athletes a month or so ago, and I told them, I gave them a bunch of different options. You can do Olympic lifting to develop power, you can do box jumps, you can do all these different things. at the end of the day, it's like I have my opinions of what's best, but do what you want to do. Do what you're going to enjoy. Do what you're going to stick to. It's going to keep people better retention. It's also going to affect this. If you have somebody doing something and they're just like shoulders drooping, miserable the whole time, it's not going to have a good effect on them that we would want it to have. Train optimally, not maximally. So everything you do in training has a reactionary effect, both in training and on other days of that kind of cycle of time over the course of weeks, as well as on your mental health. So you have to keep in mind that there's a push and pull to everything in that stress response system, and if you're doing these super high intensity workouts, pushing down the gas pedal 3 times a day, every day, that's gonna burn you out at some point. So adjust the intensity and volume of the program to ensure that you have time to recover from high CNS demand sessions before the next high demand session. And that's not just an easy example to think about is very heavy lifting. If you have somebody do the most they can bench press or something, if you have them do that every day, it's going to be very bad. But that also includes other exercise. It's very, if it's high intensity cardiovascular exercise, if it's long distance running, doing too many miles a week, any of those things can add up because, again, any of that stuff is reactionary effects in the body. Long distance endurance exercise can have those stress hormones. The cortisol can elevate after a certain period of time. So keep in mind when you design a program, if you know Saturday is going to be this really high demand day that not only maybe it isn't the heaviest thing in the world or the most taxing, but you know that your client or your group fitness class or whoever, you know that they take it very seriously and they're going to be a little anxious about it. Keep in mind that maybe the next day is not the best day to then go and do another thing that's the same way. So periodized training, if you already are not familiar with understanding how to structure workout programs over the course of a big picture, that's something you have to learn. Just having, workouts that you just, figure out what you're going to do as you walk into the gym. Once in a while that's fine, but I think especially as professionals, we're called to have a more strategic approach to that. Set attainable personal records. So set up a program so there's consistently attainable micro goals and indicators on a daily and weekly basis. Some examples, how many push-ups you can do, the weight used on exercise for a certain number of reps, the time spent you doing a certain exercise, the ability to perform a new movement. Especially with people with mental health concerns, it's very easy, everyone in general, it's very easy to get discouraged with exercise. And if you can set up these little micro goals that make people realize that they're making progress as they go over the course of their training with you or your group fitness classes or whatever you're teaching, your program that you're teaching, that's going to help people stick with it. So use these personal records to keep people going, especially when if you're working with people with a strength-related program. We all know that you can only set a new 1-rep maximum personal record so often. You're not going to do it every day, every week. But you can set personal records for, say, how many things you did for a set of 5 reps or a set of 8 reps or all these different things. You can, like, hey, could you do 2 pull-ups last week? You couldn't. You did 2 this week. Was it easier? Make sure you're reinforcing with your clients or your students how these things are improving so that way they stay encouraged. Don't neglect cardiovascular health, and I put dogs here because dog walking is an easy way to do this. Your ability to handle stressors diminishes as your aerobic base drops. So this is also important to, as I'm sure most of us all have on our personal training staffs, is particularly male students who think that cardiovascular exercise is dumb and they should never have to do it, and they just like to lift all the time. And what you have to realize is that the ability to handle stressors will get worse if your aerobic base drops. So basically, if you get in bad shape, it's going to affect your ability for that to clear those stress hormones and things like that. Steady state submaximal cardio can actually improve your stress response and improve mental health. Now that's in low intensity, so this isn't, we all see people that are over-exercising in our facilities that, maybe they're going on the elliptical for 3 hours every day, 7 days a week. That's not what this is. That can actually decrease your stress hormone response. This is walking every day. This is taking the stairs. This is doing very light, easy things. You'd be surprised at the little things that you can do to improve this area right here. I think that's where shows like Biggest Loser do a disservice to how people can improve their health and their fitness levels by feeling like everything has to be this full-go, high-intensity stuff all the time. There's a place for that for sure, but sometimes just literally if somebody's not doing anything, the first thing I tell them to do is just walk. Walk around your block in the morning, walk your dog, do something like that, and that'll make a big difference. Doesn't need to be complicated. Walk, ride a bike, take a group fitness class. Get started with something is always better than nothing, as we know, working in fitness. And recover as hard as you exercise. They had a really good, for anyone that's either goes to OSU or is an OSU fan, they had a really good article in Bleacher Report a few weeks ago about Urban Meyer, talked about some of the mental health issues he's had, and he struggled with anxiety and depression for a really long time, and that was actually part of the reason he stopped coaching at Florida. And he talks about how he's improved over time, and how one of the things he tries to remember all the time is to constantly make deposits in his stress bank as he withdraws. So if you have busy work, taxing relationships, exercising all the time, those things can be pulling from that bank, and you want to make sure you're making deposits in that bank as well, doing some of these things. So things like massage therapy, there's different other types of methods you can do. Epsom salt baths can facilitate recovery, improve stress response. Diaphragmatic breathing makes a huge difference. That's something that just since I started doing it, not only does it help your body be able to function better, but the research shows actually that when you do diaphragmatic breathing and you take big deep breaths, they're not kind of the short little shoulder breaths that we typically take, that actually switches your body into that parasympathetic nervous system state. So sitting there and doing 10 long, deep diaphragmatic breaths can switch you from being in that stress mode with your foot down on the pedal to being back in that parasympathetic state. Now, is something like that going to totally fix somebody's mental health problems? No, but when you think about all the different things we can do to take the edge off, if somebody's going to the counselor and it's helping a little bit, but they still have some things they're dealing with, if we can get them to just knock down that stress response a little bit, it's going to make a huge difference. Find productive ways to recover that also help you relax and engage the parasympathetic portion of the nervous system, like I just said. I think with this stuff, the key is, it's like the exercise stuff. Do what you want to do. If say technically walking on an incline on the treadmill for this exact period of time is going to be the ideal thing to improve your fitness. If you hate the idea of that and you're like, I'd rather just walk my dog for half an hour, it's like, just walk your dog for half an hour. Like, unless you're training for some specific athletic event, it's better that you do that for an extended period of time consistently than do this perfect thing inconsistently all the time. So something to keep in mind. So in summary, with all of these things, mental health is an incredibly important issue, and we play a crucial role in students' physical and mental well-being. We basically have all of our students, whether they work for us, whether they're undergrad staff, graduate staff, whether they're patrons or users, we have these students at a very crucial time in their development in their mental health. And how they basically use these couple years that we have them with is going to be determinant not only of their happiness and general well-being, but literally can make or break the difference between whether they're homeless in jail. That's how big of a deal some of these things are. So realizing that how important that is. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we should all make it a priority to become better educated in ways to support our students. So as I'm sure I tried to condense all this down, it was a lot of stuff. We could go on and on about the stress response system and more. I could go into detail about all these methods that we can use to improve it, but I tried to condense it down to hopefully give everyone a bigger picture idea of why this is important, give you an idea of how this is all connected, and then give you a few things that you can take from today to implement right away. But I would encourage everybody that if you weren't familiar with a lot of this stuff before today, to use this as a jumping off point to start learning more about it. Also, I have, like I said, I have a series of articles that basically, this presentation is a condensed down version of what I really draw out a lot more, where I interviewed a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists. I went through a ton of research, all these different things. So if you'd like more of that information, you could just feel free to shoot me an email. I'm also giving another similar presentation to this, but it's going to be directed at athletes, Division I athletes at Robert Morris University in December. So I'm trying to video record all these presentations so I can start building some resource bank stuff together. So if you'd be interested in seeing that presentation, let me know, and I can see about sending that to you. But I'm trying to get as much of this stuff together as I can, because I know for me, especially as I saw the relationship between my own exercise and mental health, I'm sitting there Googling, exercise and mental health, and literally nothing comes up. Like, it's basic, like livestrong.com will have like, oh, walking is good for depression. Like, that's basically the crux of what the resources have been. And now it's like, you Google it, it's like the only things that come up are like the articles that I wrote this year. So it's like, that's cool, but it's at the same time, it shows you have a lack of information that is out there. So contact me with any more questions that you have. If you have any specific questions about any of this content. Does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot of information, but does anyone have any questions about either the general principles or exercise program design, where you can learn more about this stuff, anything in general? If you do have questions, just shoot me an email, but that is it. Thank you.